Hey guys, Taylor here from Cosmic, and today I have a series of really important tips around finishing music. Now, finishing music is, I think, the most important aspect of our development as artists. It's the best and most effective way to get better. But one thing that happens when we reach the end of a production is we don't really know, or sometimes we don't really know, when to stop tweaking, right? When can we call the song done? And so what I want to go through with you guys today is really a 6-part checklist of things that you can do. And if you do them, after you're done with them, you can say, okay, I'm comfortable that this track is done now. And you can, send it off and move on to the next one, things like that. So I'm going to be jumping back and forth between Ableton and back here to talk to you guys kind of face to face like this to go through each of these 6 tips. Some of them are really DAW focused. Some of them are more conceptual, and we'll just talk about them. So let's get started. All right, so here we are in Ableton. This is a remix I worked on last year, and we can use this project to demonstrate a couple of the items on our finishing tracks checklist. And the first of those items is what we'll call checking for change. Now, what that means is that in electronic music, in almost every style, something should happen every 8 or at least every 16 measures to keep the listener interested. So that could be introducing a new concept, taking an instrument or a layer away, just introducing vocals, just changing things enough every at least 8 or 16 bars to make something happen so it feels like the song is moving along. And the best way that I can recommend that you actually go through this checklist and do this as a part of your process is to go and do what I've done here. Go at the top of the track and label every 8 bars what's happening. And what that process forces you to do is to sit and actually identify what you're doing, right? So if you're sitting here and you can't come up with a label for what's happening at that point, that's an indicator to you that maybe you're not doing enough to keep the listener's interest, right? So it's really more of a verification tool. You're going through and you're saying, okay, what is happening here? Am I doing enough? It's a check on yourself. So if we just listen to a couple of these, we'll see right here at this marker is where the first drop happens. And then 8 bars later, I have this marker for drums, the vocals start. So I'll run through a couple of these so you guys can hear what's happening at some of these markers so you can tell what this concept means. So you can hear drums came in, vocals came in. Now this one here, I'll play it for you. Nothing really happens too much, but because of the arrangement of the song, where the vocals are playing along and the verse kind of comes to the second half of the lyrics of the verse, it feels appropriate. But I still put a marker here just to show myself that, okay, I've checked in with that point and I've made an intentional decision about why I'm okay without introducing so many other elements, because the way the vocal sounds makes it feel appropriate. Check it out. So you see the verse kind of turns around there. I also have like a percussion that kind of punctuates that section between where the vocals start and what 16 measures later when this groove ends. Something does happen in that middle 8 bars where I think I remove a kick, and there's some percussion here that kind of sets off that section. So at least something is happening, but I've shown that I've looked into it by placing that marker there. Okay, so the second item on our list is what we're going to call the level check and really the mix check, right? So in this stage, we're going to use reference tracks. So what I've done here on my master channel is I have pulled in my favorite referencing plugin. It's called Metric AB. And what you can do here is you can set this marker to a certain point in your reference track. And when I click this button to turn it orange, it's referencing the reference track. And when I click blue, it flips back to my track, and you can flip back and forth as in time as the tracks both play along. Now in this step, you want to not just use your eyes, but also use your ears to verify the loudness of the instruments, so the kick drum, the snare, the synthesizers, the vocals, all of these things are in line with professional tracks. This is really a referencing step in your checklist. Now, for purposes of this video, I've just brought in one reference. Typically with this section, with this part of your process, you would go through and at least check against 4 to 6 tracks and play the averages. But I'm just going to show you a quick example of what this process sort of looks like and sounds like. So if I go here, I've set this marker for exactly the main drop of my reference. I'm going to put my marker within Ableton at the main drop of my song, and listen and watch what happens as I flip back and forth between these two songs, and listen particularly to the loudness of the snare and the kick drum and the sort of sawtooth chords. You're going to hear these big chords that play. And what you're going to hear is I've tried to level match everything in the ballpark, or at least as close as I can, to a reference track like this. The cool thing about this plugin is what I always do is I use my ears first. Okay, things sound like they're pretty well in line. Then I can go to this tab, the spectrum, and I can do the same thing. So I'll go here and set my marker back to 1. I'll put my marker in Ableton back to the drop. I'll go to the spectrum tab, and then I'll flip back and forth, and I'm going to be watching visually what the frequency spectrums look like in both tracks as I flip back and forth between them, and just seeing whether or not the curves generally line up with each other in the way that I'm at least hearing it as though the levels are roughly matched. And what you really want to take a look for, again, is where the kick drum is peaking here and where the highs are peaking. You want a very similar shape, especially on the highs and the lows. So what you can see there is that my kick is peaking just a little bit above the reference track. And this is where, I'd want to bring in other tracks, some of which are in the same key as well, because the kick fundamental will line up right on each other. But you want to make sure that, okay, I'm seeing my kicks a little bit louder than this track. Let's pull in a couple of more, play the averages, and make sure that my kick drum isn't louder than most of them or all of them. If it is, that's an indication to me, okay, I need to adjust the level of my kick a little bit. What I did like though is the top end, the high end frequencies, that curve was very, very close. So, things like effects and white noise and hi-hats and so on, I'm pretty comfortable what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing visually that my levels for those high frequency elements are generally in line. All right, so item 3 in our list is to get feedback. Now you want to build a community or at least a couple of trusted ears that you can rely on to get feedback on your tracks. And we're not looking for a couple of friends who say, oh, cool track, bro. We're looking for people who are willing to tell you, hey, you should rethink this aspect of your mix, or, call into question a creative decision you may have made that might not be working as well as it could, right? We need people who are willing to tell us when something might need to be reconsidered. And, in Cosmic, we have an amazing community where we have 3 times a week, we do a feedback session with the group and we get on Zoom and everyone listens to each other's tracks. But even if you don't have something like that, you should at least have a couple trusted people, both producers and maybe the occasional non-producer as well, because we want to also make sure our music is just generally, appeals to the average listener. But we want some people who are willing to be honest with us. And that is a critical component before we send a track out to labels or to the world. Before we can call it done, we need some people that we trust to make sure that they've given it their stamp of approval as well. All right, so the next item on our list is what I'm going to call the mute trick. Now, what this is meant to address is as we produce, we tend to keep adding things into our song, pulling more elements in, pulling more layers in, and sometimes we have a tendency to kind of overproduce things. We keep adding things in, but we don't take as many things out as we always should. This is a process that helps you. It really is a helpful tool to clean up your mix down, to make sure you haven't packed so much in your song that your mix is actually suffering for it. And the real test is here, you're going to go through all of your groups or your channels or your layers, and you're going to mute everything one by one. And if you hear something, if you hear a difference when you mute it, that means it's making an audible difference in your track. If you don't hear any difference at all, take it out, because all it's doing is just adding to the loudness of your track in a bad way, right? It's eating up headroom that isn't going to allow you to get as loud of a mix, as loud of a master, as clear of a mix either, right? It could be muddying things up. So anything that doesn't make a difference when you mute it, as you go down one by one, and this one's more vertically, right? Take it out of your song. But if you do hear a difference, then you know it's making a difference. So let's play this drop. And what I'm going to do is I have like this arpeggio here, and you might not really hear it as I'm playing the song, but when I take it out, see if you notice it. Listen for it one more time. I'm going to solo it so you know what it sounds like, and then see again if you hear it when I mute it. Okay, let's try one more time. I hear it. I think it's very subtle, but I do think it adds a really nice sort of drive to the second half of the groove. It's a subtle one. It might, in my opinion, provide me an indication I want to turn it up a little bit. So I might turn it up a decibel or a decibel and a half, make it a bit more present in the mix, but I do notice a difference there. Another thing you can do is use the same technique within groups or within your layering stacks, right? So you'll see this ARP is actually 2 layers. So if I solo this ARP layer this ARP group by itself, listen for what happens when I mute each of these 2 layers and see if you hear a difference. So I think it's pretty clear you can hear a difference between those 2 layers. When I mute one, the sound really does change. And so you can see how this concept builds on itself, right? So even within groups, okay, we know these 2 layers are kind of necessary together to build up to the sound that we want. And that we know in the context of the full mix, this instrument, when I mute it, it really does, I think, make a subtle difference, but it's still an audible difference. And I like it enough to where I want to keep it in. Now, what this does though, is again, even though I think it's subtle, even though I think it's arguable whether it makes a really noticeable difference, I've at least gone through this process and I've made an intentional decision about whether or not this should stay in. I'm not just leaving a bunch of bloat within my project that could be muddying up the mix. So the 5th item on our list is a really important one, and this is the system reference. So when you're producing your song, you're listening to it on your monitors, on your headphones, but you're only listening to it on 1 or maybe 2 systems. You're hearing it in the same room, you're hearing it in the same circumstances, but we need to make sure that our mix and our songs translate to a wide variety of different situations, and especially different devices that people are going to be listening to music on, right? So people are listening to music on, headphones and laptop speakers and in their car and so on. And so as producers, before we can call a song done, we should be listening to our music on all of these different devices and make sure that it still sounds the way we want it to sound. So the car test is a big one. If you have a car, go out and listen to it there, because a lot of people are listening to music in their car. Laptop speakers, like I said, listen to your mix on laptop speakers. I have a couple more devices I want to show you that are really critical to my process in particular. Apple AirPods, right? These things. Or any type of earbud or in-ear headphone that comes with phones. everyone is listening to music on these things. And so you need to check your mix on something like this. It's really, really important. And you also would be surprised how revealing these things are. They can show you things in your mix that you will not hear on your monitors. It's a really important part of my process. Also, a phone. Listen to your music on a phone speaker. We have all been to those parties where, those house parties like late at night, where someone's blasting electronic music on a freaking iPhone. It's important to listen to it on this because people are gonna listen to your music on their phone. And also, and I know this sounds crazy, in Alexa or some type of really crappy speaker like this, because as much as we hate to admit it, people are also listening on stuff like this. And so we need to make sure that at least our song translates in some reasonable way to bad, really bad systems like this. So I actually check it on this Amazon Alexa, and if it sounds good on that thing, it probably sounds good most other places as well. Okay, so the last item on our list is take a break. I know a lot of producers, and I've been guilty of this too, you want to export the song and immediately send it to the label. Don't do it. Just give it a day, sleep on it, give it at least 24 hours, come back to it the next day with your ears rested, get a little bit further away from the track, and just become a little bit more objective, and then give it that one final listen. You know, it's a slippery slope. You don't want to keep doing this and use it as an excuse to go back and make tweaks over and over and over, because remember, we're trying to finish a song here. But that one last listen after a break can help you get more objective and say, okay, is this done, or is there one more move I need to make just that's really glaring that I really need to fix? You're not going to know it that night, at 3 a.m. when you're exporting the song. The next day, after the weekend, and you listen to it again, you're going to be in a much better position to decide, is this done? And if it still sounds good after a break, you should be good to go. All right, guys, so I hope you found this helpful. Next time you're approaching the end of a song, go through this list and do these 6 things. I promise you the song is going to be better for it. You're going to feel better when you send it off to a label or wherever you're sending it out. You're going to feel more confident about the fact that you've done everything that you need to do to make sure your track is really, really done. So good luck producing, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.